an age rife with conflict and corruption. And so with the power of art and storytelling, he hoped to let's say to noise on high the war horn of truth as a booming roar that it might be heard by everybody. In so doing, awakening within us an intellect to see clearly the anti-truths plaguing society. Hello, welcome back to Amalion. In this video today, I just wanted to talk about a few things that I believe are of significant importance to when looking at Tolkien's fictional writings and striving to understand how his mind worked and to kind of glean a clearer vision of, well, what Tolkien's vision was. Before one is to attempt understanding the meticulous mind of Tolkien and the depth of his literary art, one should acknowledge particular words, so words that he very likely himself would have thought about many times. I mean, after all, Tolkien, well, he was a man of many words, and he was a lover of languages. So the first word that I wish to bring to your attention is mythos. Mythos. It's a Greek word, and it means story. The word myth is used far more commonly nowadays to refer to a mythological story, of course. So these particular stories, they possess an important and extraordinary virtue. So what do myths do? Well, they explain. Myths explain. It's one of the most important words to understand when entering into the Tolkienian realm. And so myths explain a deeper meaning that lies beyond mere fact, in the scientific sense. So when these deep meanings are conveyed through the literary mode of myth, the story itself becomes a lens through which one can view the world around them. Say a mountain is no longer like the mere result of the reformation of the Earth's surface after long periods of weathered change. The mountain becomes, a sleeping giant, say, from the perilous Jotunheim. In other words, myth is imagination, a very potent form of imagination. And all human beings possess the sight of myth. We all intrinsically have it within us. We all possess the ability to either tell a story or listen to one. The stories about a particular person or a particular place. A hero or a significant place in the world that holds some secret hidden power of some kind of enchantment. One might think of, say, the Lady of the Lake, and the kingdom that's beneath the water. This sight is intrinsic within us all, and so for that very reason, there are mythologies found all over the world. So what does this mean? Well, this means myth itself is culture, each one possessing their very own. The different places in the world, they have their own mythology. So for example, the Finnish people have the Kalevala. The Norse people, they have the Poetic Edda, and so on and so forth. Many rationalizations, motifs, and songs and tales. They have their striking similarities, of course, and their differences. Even in stories that were only passed down orally, not written down. So Tolkien believed that the explanation to this remarkable phenomenon was that all of mankind was fashioned by the same creator, the same one creator. So every human being has a mind created by God. That's what he believed. Therefore, all perceptions of a higher being, in the end, lead to that one creator. No matter your spiritual basis, it is wise that in pursuing this study, Tolkienian studies, that one heeds this formula and follows it. Because, well, J.R.R. Tolkien himself, he was a devoted Roman Catholic, and so if you want to understand how his mind was working and when he was crafting, subcreating all of these stories, well, obviously it's wise to think in a similar manner that he did. C.S. Lewis, he once told Tolkien that he believed myths were lies, even though lies breathed through silver. He didn't agree with this. He objected to the statement. He believed that myths were truth. Though the events in a tale may not have actually occurred, this does not mean that it is devoid of meaning, devoid of truth. The things a story represents, what it represents, is relevant. Even the Bible is teeming with mythic elements. And so does this render the Bible's stories and messages and meanings false or makes them a lie? While Tolkien would have unequivocally said, certainly not. Over the long course of history, now of course this is putting it very briefly, and I am no authority on the subject, but nevertheless I'll attempt to explain this here. So over the long course of history, Christian, Roman, and Germanic tales, they all eventually converged, blending together. Okay, so with all these cultures, tossed into the cauldron and stirred together, the result was that composed of both Christian and pagan mythological elements. Okay, so of course you're going to have all these elements mixed together, and they're going to bear an influence on the story, of course. As I've said many times, Tolkien was a Catholic. He believed that all tales came from the same source, from God. All myths, therefore, whether manifested by the consciousness of an idolatrous sun worshipper, let's say, or one of God's prophets, either way, they contain inherent truths, which all lead to the very same final source. At the top of that mountain, or at the top of that ladder, they all lead to the same source, which is God. However, Tolkien did not turn aside from pagan myths and legend, rebuking them as blasphemy. Instead, he delved deeply into them in an attempt to discover why they were so appealing to him and to discover their virtue. Ever since he was a child, listening to his mother read Sigurd and the Dragon Fafnir, he had been dazzled and wonderstruck by pagan stories. There was a reason for this, and he strove to find out just why he appreciated these tales so much. He knew that they contained an abundance of valuable meaning, just like many medieval scribes before him who strove to preserve the myths of the Germanic peoples. Instead of just burning them, destroying them, they preserved them. These myths today are known as the Elder Edda. Einar Selvik, he's the creator of the musical project Wardruna, or Valaruna to pronounce it accurately. His music is influenced chiefly by Germanic myth and runic philology. And so Einar Selvik, he once said the following words, and I'm paraphrasing here. And these words, I'm inclined to believe Tolkien would have agreed with them had he been alive today to hear them. It matters not at all from whence a person has come, nor by what cultural practices they live. What matters is that the myths and stories we tell and hear are indeed hearkened to and valued. A tree could be standing in Norway, admired by its people. Another could be in Africa, admired by its people. No matter where in the world it stands, what matters most is the foundation in which their roots grow. There is no room for competition, superiority, nor declination of others. The tree of tales is more important, for its roots determine the stock and character of an entire people. This manner of thinking pertains to the relevance of myth, of course. Its meaning, like the roots of a tall tree, is what matters, for it emerges from the same foundation, which is from truth. Truth is its foundation. Myth is capable of creating an entire culture, and in extension governs the very merit and strengths of a civilization. And on the subject of civilizations, Tolkien knew that the one in which he was living was entering into a new age, we could say. An age rife with conflict and corruption. And so with the power of art and storytelling, he hoped to let's say, to noise on high the war horn of truth. So as a booming roar that it might be heard by everybody. And in so doing, awakening within us an intellect to see clearly the anti-truths plaguing society. When this occurs, then when we're awakened, we can take up arms and we can embark upon the quest to mend the innumerable errors committed by the fallen wizards of our time, and in so doing, recover the dignity and virtue by which our society ought to live. One of the many approaches Tolkien used to achieve this endeavor, this daring endeavor, was in stripping the pagan myths of their blasphemies, leaving behind only the valuable elements and lessons which he believed were important for the new generations of Western civilization to read and absorb. Such elements he then incorporated into his own reconstructed, easily accessible literary mode, allowing for a modern audience to grasp and fathom them without difficulty. And in so doing, the reader is able to learn and embrace the heroic acts and courageous virtues found within the stories, and is thus capable of carrying them out in their own daily lives. And by doing that, they are thus transmuting those virtues into a kind of buckler of protection against the corruption of the ever-progressing demonic modern machine. We may mention the legends of King Arthur next. The legends of King Arthur, they're rich and they're wonderful. They're wonderful stories. And Tolkien himself, he enjoyed reading them. He did. However, they're teeming with Christian narrative. You might wonder, well, what's the problem with that? Wasn't Tolkien a Christian himself? Like, wouldn't that be a good thing? Well, okay, so I'll explain. He knew that if he were to create his own mythology for England, he knew that he could not simply create his own Arthurian works. He knew that he could not create any form of myth which took place upon the primary world, our Earth, set during our Earth's history, because it would conflict with the Catholic doctrines of creation. A myth in the primary world will always end up leading directly to God, as I've said before. And Tolkien's mythology consisted of a mythological creation story. Obviously, he had a problem with the idea of contradicting the Christian truth, the Christian truth of existence, or creating a myth which might be mistaken as his attempt to write a blasphemous new gospel. So obviously that's a major problem, and he truly did not want to accidentally convey that through his stories. So therefore, many risky challenges were set before him. So how might he safely create his own mythology? How could he have gods in his world if the one true God was omnipresent? So it might be said that these problems manifested an important theological realization, which he eventually wrote about in his essay on fairy stories. Tolkien came to realize that the only way he could create a mythology that was not in conflict with the Christian myth was by sub-creating his own world. In extension, this discernment brought about the perception that fairy tales ought to take place in a secondary world, for they're meant to be a means of escape, an escape from the reader's woes and toil, but an innocent escape from the primary world, an escape that's not looked at as an abandonment or like a cowardly retreat, but rather an innocent escape, and in so doing, an escape that brings about the recovery of the self, of the spirit, of courage, of many things, of every part of us. So the solution to his problem of Christian conflict equated in a fruitful new discovery of the values of fairy, which is that the reading of a fairy tale is capable of providing the reader an escape from his troubles of worldliness. But this can only happen if the fairy tale itself requires the reader to enter into a secondary world. So a fairy tale in the primary world, it's too easily subjected to the potential of allegory. Tolkien saw this as a big problem, because when allegory arises, the believability of the reader, it comes crashing down. So the idea is for disbelief to be suspended, and that's achievable. That's achievable with a fairy tale that takes place in a secondary, sub-created world. But once allegory arises, it takes the reader's mind and it comes crashing down, and it brings us back into Earth. So that suspension of disbelief suddenly is renewed. So the disbelief enters into the mind of the reader, which is a problem. Tolkien He didn't want his story to do that, because he wanted his stories to be immersive. He wanted the stories to make the reader feel like they were in another world, or escaping, but also wandering in a secondary world that taught the virtues that one could carry back with them into the primary world. So it's like learning about our world, our primary world, learning about it and its values whilst wandering in a different, an other world. It's a good way of putting it. When you fail to suspend disbelief, then the mind is directed forcefully back into the dreary primary world from which Tolkien hoped to grant an escape for his reader. So hopefully you can understand what I mean by that, and how allegory would therefore, it would merely contradict the entire endeavor. Though Tolkien embarked upon his plan to become the governing creator of his own world, he did not in it omit his Christian beliefs. Indeed, the Bible, it was still an inspiration to him in the overall structural integrity of Arda. What many readers, chiefly early critiques, have failed to comprehend is that the Silmarillion is an intrinsically Catholic work. It really is. So if God is the one and only creator of all things, then that means everything else created by his children is therefore a subcreation of his primary existence. We are not primary creators, for we are not gods. In coining the term subcreation, Tolkien acknowledged the one true God and affirmed his primary creation. Dubbing himself as a sub-creator, he denied any godlike claim, revealing to the world that he took no credit whatever for being a creator himself, for there is only one. And of course, this is a Christian statement, absolutely. Indeed, Tolkien did not claim credit for his subcreation at all, confessing that all things are made by God alone. God created man, thus man creates only because of God. Perhaps this is most apparent in the fact that Tolkien chose for his Arda to be ruled over by the one, Eru. Thank you so much for watching this video and for following along through it, and I hope that it helped to offer you a little bit of wisdom into the workings of Tolkien's mind, or possibly the workings of his mind, and the foundation upon which he structured his mythological cycle and all of the stories that take place within that wonderful mythology that he created and left for us all to enjoy. I hope to create some more videos on this subject, as I think it is probably, one of the most fascinating areas of the Tolkienian studies, and arguably one of the most important in relation to Tolkien's creative genius and the potency of its enchantment.
And one of our natural factors is wishing to create, but since we aren't creators, we have to sub-create. Let's say we have to rearrange the primary material in some particular form, which pleases us, which it isn't necessarily a moral pleasing, it's partly aesthetic pleasing.